welcome to Adaptation, where we talk about film adaptations and the original material they're based on. I'm Kendyl Bryant, and I am so glad to see that you were appropriately cautious last week during the Ides of March and were able to avoid any assassination attempts. Especially because this week we're going to be talking about the Bard himself and some of the ways that he used and influenced language. I'm even drinking out of my Shakespearean insults mug for the occasion. You clod of wayward marl. As you might have heard somewhere before, William Shakespeare was an English playwright who lived from 1564 to 1616 and wrote 38 plays and 154 sonnets during that time. His plays, of course, have been adapted more times than we could possibly count for stage and screen, and somehow in over a half a century, their resonance hasn't dwindled with us mere mortals. Shakespeare wrote largely in blank verse, which is metered lines that don't rhyme, and that's not really uncommon for playwrights at the time, but Shakespeare played with it and experimented throughout his works, some might say perfecting it by the end of his career. He would end sentences mid-line instead of at the end lines with a unstressed syllable, and even use one metered line throughout the dialogue of two characters. And unless you have not so much brains but earwax, you might have heard that Shakespeare played not just with form, but with words as well. He would take words from other languages and alter them a bit, change nouns to verbs, verbs to adjectives, and basically ended up creating a lot of words, phrases, and even names that we still use today. It's estimated that 1,700 words that Shakespeare used showed up for the first time in his works. Things like sanctimonious, auspicious, bedazzled, and for any Divergent fans, dauntless. Also the names Olivia, Miranda, Cordelia, and Jessica, a favorite of ours at Adaptation, showed up for the first time in works of Shakespeare, along with phrases like wild goose chase, in a pickle, and in stitches. So I'm thinking that it would take somebody that was all eyes and no sight to miss the fact that we owe Shakespeare a lot. Taking a short break from language for a second, Shakespeare also created the genre of romantic tragedy with Romeo and Juliet, mostly because romance just wasn't deemed worthwhile enough to be tragic back in the day. Today that seems a bit laughable to me, considering it seems like that's what most of the media is about. But I'm glad that Shakespeare broke the ice by understanding that romance is just part of the tragedy of being human. That understanding of the human condition also led him to a new use for the soliloquy. Soliloquies were mostly used for exponential purposes before Shakespeare, to tell the audience more information about the plot or introduce characters. But Shakespeare decided to use them to give his characters a little bit more depth and give the audience insight into their internal struggles. This gave the audiences a bit more flushed out characters than had previously been seen on stage. It's kind of like a voiceover, but you know, doesn't set your teeth on edge. But my favorite thing that Shakespeare did with language was the jokes, particularly the puns. His plays are riddled with them, and it simultaneously makes them more enjoyable, read, funny, but it also makes them sometimes harder to understand because there's just so many layers to everything. My favorite example of this is the title to Much Ado About Nothing. Taken literally, it means that there was a big commotion over something that turned out to be inconsequential. But it's not just that. Nothing, or no thing, used to be slang term for lady bits. So in that context, it's a big commotion about two guys who are trying to get into two girls' pants. But in addition, nothing and noting were also homophones in Shakespeare's day, so the title can also be a reference to noting, or spying, eavesdropping, etc., which plays a big part in the play and indeed leads to much ado. Basically, the title has a triple meaning, and anyone who doesn't think that's genius is a beetle-headed, flap-eared knave. But of course, Shakespeare didn't invent puns, he was just really good at using them. There are, however, two kinds of jokes that Shakespeare is credited with creating. First is the knock-knock joke, and the second is what Wikipedia refers to as the maternal insult, otherwise known as a your mama joke. The knock-knock joke appears in Macbeth when the porter is awoken by a knocking at the door, and he responds, "Who's there?" of course, and the maternal insult appears in Titus Andronicus when Chiron says, "Thou hast undone our mother," and Aaron responds, "Villain, I have done thy mother, you warthog-faced buffoon." No, that's not Shakespeare. But it so could be. How about this? "You mountain of mad flesh, canker blossom, quintessence of dust, the veriest varlet that ever chewed with a tooth? Better. Now, it's high time I wrap this up, but I hope you learned something, even if it was just how to creatively insult people. Make sure you like and subscribe to your heart's content, and check the info section for the links to all our social media in one fell swoop. Also, please check out our podcast on iTunes if you like too much of a good thing. Until next time, I do desire that we may be better strangers.